brighter days.
And welcoming my first guest to the programme, a woman with a beautiful name, I have to say, because her name too is Pippa, and this is Pippa King. Good afternoon, Pippa, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Pippa. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good. Now then, so a lot to get through, and I'm going to start by asking you, of course, all of this around the subject of surveillance, of our data being stored, of the information that is collected by the authorities on our behalf, allegedly, but there are, of course, a lot of concerns about this. Let's start by looking at this report that UK police forces have secret facial recognition database of 18 million people.
Yes, it came to light last November. We have a Biometrics Commissioner in the UK that was appointed in 2013, and his first annual report came out in December last year. But in November last year, the House of Commons Select Committee for Science and Technologies opened up a consultation period on the current and future uses of biometric material. And I put a submission in, as did about 25 other people, including the Biometrics Commissioner and the Association of Police Chief Officers, ACPO, in the UK. ACPO, in their submission, had made no mention whatsoever of the fact that they had a facial recognition database running on their Police National database of 12 million images, which were from custody, body-worn cameras and CCTV. The Biometrics Commissioner's submission from looking at the submission, it sounds like he's almost stumbled upon the fact the police had got this national facial recognition database, because he was made aware of it in April 2014 when it actually went live. But if you go to ACPO's website, they've kindly got the minutes of some of the meetings of their chief constables there, and they've actually been talking about a facial recognition database since October 2012. That was the first mention in their minutes. So not only have they taken it upon themselves to add facial images to the Police National database, but they haven't, it seems, sort of had consultation with the Information Commissioner's Office or the Biometrics Commissioner. And so we now have a live system in the UK. And the BBC ran an article earlier this month saying that the facial database had risen from 12 million photographs to 18 million photographs. So there's obviously quite a large leap of images getting on there. And I think the main concern is that a lot of the images are of people that are innocent. So if you've possibly been on a demonstration, been caught by evidence gatherers, police evidence gatherers, or if you've been arrested for a crime and then been found innocent, your image could well be on that system without us knowing about it and without the police really being that transparent that they're doing it. So we have a situation where I think at the moment we had a Lord Scriven asked a question in the House of Lords as to when would this, details of the database be made public? And Lord Bates, who he mentioned that there'll be a report from the Home Office in spring. So that's where we're at. So I took it upon myself last week to send a Freedom of Information request to the Association of Police Chief Officers, asking a series of 15 questions as precisely to what the system was capable of. So in the next 20 days, hopefully I'll get an answer to the Freedom of Information request and we can more clearly see what capabilities this database has. Give me an idea, Pippa, of a couple of examples of those 15 questions. What is important from your perspective to be answered here? I wanted to know the percentage of people that were innocent that were on the database. I wanted to know the rate of false positives and false negatives, because the system has to be very accurate if it's going to start to pinpoint people. I'd be very interested to know the capabilities of the system, whether it can see at night, whether it can see through in fog, because some facial detection systems can do that. And also, as well, some facial detection systems can possibly be run in a lifetime scenario. So the police could possibly, this could be a scenario that could be happening, but we don't know, could be wearing body-worn cameras, and through a sort of real-time interface with the database, they could get information fed through their earpieces as to who exactly is standing in front of them. Gosh, that is quite scary. You mentioned earlier sourcing of these images, whether they be through somebody who's held in custody from a demonstration or from CCTV cameras as we go about our business, going shopping or walking through a street in the United Kingdom. Those images that are taken by a CCTV camera, who do they belong to, Pippa? This is a question that I've asked a friend of mine who used to actually lead the council here where I live. I think it's when they're on the Police National Database, the data controller is the chief constable of the force. So we've got 43 forces, so presumably that we have 43 data controllers. Increasingly, though, these CCTV cameras that are in high streets are high definition. So the thing that's not enabled facial recognition technology to be very accurate in the past is because of the resolution of the images, which has sort of changed now. For example, we have West Midlands Police are running or planning to run a facial recognition system called Face in the Crowd, whereby if somebody comes to them with a photograph of a missing person, they can then run that through their high-definition CCTV cameras and pick up where that person was last, which, of course, sounds great for missing people, but obviously they can also use that for persons of interest to them as well. So the exact use to what these databases are being put to use for hasn't been clarified at all. I think it's one of the reasons the Biometric Commissioner was concerned about it, obviously, apart from the fact the police hadn't been very transparent in how they'd compiled the database, was the fact that, you know, the acceptability to the public was a big thing for him. The inclusion of innocence and the scope of searching that database, the absence of rigorous testing and reliability, and the fact there's been no public or parliamentary debate whatsoever on this. We also have Leicestershire Police running a system called NeoFace, and again, we're not fully aware of what the capabilities of that system are, and they have 100,000 custodial photographs on that database. But my question would be, where are the images coming from that you want to run against that database? Because if they're coming from CCTV cameras in the high street, even private surveillance systems, body-worn cameras from police, we really have nowhere to be private, you know, and that's a big concern for myself anyway.
Of course, we've seen recent attempts, moreover, to get the Snoopers Charter through Parliament. Now, this is another form of surveillance, which is actually about our information that we send, the content of what we are writing, of what we are writing about, of what we're writing to each other. That, alongside facial recognition in the way that you're describing it, is quite terrifying to think that so much information could be garnered about an individual very, very quickly, and even a face put to that information which perhaps would otherwise be to some extent anonymous.
Yes, and I think it's also about gathering massive data sets, and the thing that will analyse the data sets is a computer algorithm, and these computer algorithms are constantly getting more intelligent as more data is being fed to them, and it's this sort of presumption of what you might do next. I mean, for example, in Scotland, Glasgow is being heralded as the first smart city in the UK, which is going to make it sort of connectable with lampposts, with CCTV, Wi-Fi, and they're running a CCTV system there that is able to predict crime hotspots dependent on the information that it's got in the system. And my worry is that if we're having this facial recognition system that's constantly running and the capabilities of the technology is constantly improving, are they then going to be able to detect pre-crime in individuals? I mean, we're sort of getting onto the realms of Hollywood movie Minority Report stuff here, which we actually are not that far away from.
Well, and, you know, taking it a step further, of course, something which I know is very close to your heart because it's something that you experienced yourself, and that is the idea of biometrics in schools. In other words, our children's data being taken and stored from school age. Tell us about, first of all, how this was brought to your attention, Pippa.
Well, my background in writing the recent article that I just did on the police surveillance systems, biometric ones, was I've been at this for 10 years. My children in 2005 were aged 6 and 7 years old, and the school they were in had a fingerprint scanner for a library card system. There was only 160 children in the school. You don't need that sort of high tech for a primary school library card system. And I spotted the thumbprint scanner in the library and said to the head teacher, "When are you going to ask for parental permission from this? Because I can tell you now, I'm not going to accept that being used with my children. And she very calmly told me that actually she could take my children's fingerprint without telling me about it, and that was completely legal. And I was horrified about this. I got then in touch with some privacy organisations in London, Privacy International, and a little-known organisation called Action on Rights for Children. They informed me that actually schools are allowed to do this, and from 2001 up to 2013, schools could take children's fingerprints, facial details, infrared palm scans, and store them on databases without telling parents, because under our Data Protection Act in the UK, we have certain criteria which is classed as sensitive information, such as ethnicity, religion, criminal record, member of a union, that sort of thing. And because technology has sort of outgrown the law, biometric data is not classed as sensitive. So when schools want to process non-sensitive data, they don't have to ask for parents' permission. So myself, and with the help of these privacy organisations, including No2ID, we lobbied Parliament from 2007 to 2010. The then Labour government didn't want to talk to us at all about what was happening in the schools. As far as they were concerned, schools could do what they want as long as they operated within the law, which they were doing. The Conservative and Liberal Democrat opposition were clearly not happy, and we had a number of questions asked in the House of Commons, of which we got the same answer back from the Labour department. But they did say, the Conservatives and the Dems, that if they got into power, they would rectify the law and do something about it. And to be fair, they did. They got into power in 2010, they formed a coalition, and very shortly after they got into power, they drafted a bill called the Protection of Freedoms Bill, which is now the Protection of Freedoms Act. And within 3 clauses of that act, it covers biometrics in schools. And so now, if a school wants to introduce a biometric system, they have to ask both parents permission. They have to get a written response that they want their children's biometric data to be processed. If one parent disagrees with another parent, the parent that disagrees, that overrides the consent of the parent that does agree. And if the child doesn't agree, that overrides the consent of the parent. So it's quite strict. This applies to all under 18-year-olds. So I think that the reason why, we had all sorts of technology thrown at schools for different purposes. The main purpose now is for school canteens and school libraries. Some schools use it for registration. Some schools use it for lockers. But the biometric industry basically came in from 2001 to 2012 and tested all different types of biometric technologies in different circumstances on the 9 million school children that are in the UK. And now we think there's probably about 60% of high schools are using biometric technology. Interestingly enough, when it first came in the UK, they were throwing the technology at primary schools, and it really wasn't acceptable to the parents there. And I can understand, I was one of those parents. But now they tend to introduce biometric technology at a high school level. Children have got mobile phones that now are opened by facial imaging or thumbprints, and it's a more acceptable technology to the children there. And also as well, in a high school setting, you don't get parents waiting in the playground to pick kids up talking to each other, which is what happens at primary school. So this is what I think the industry's found the high school market more palatable socially than the primary school market in the UK. But it's still a technology that's being used in schools in the UK, but they do have this stringent consent now. I'm not certain, actually, whether or not schools are using it much in Europe. I know some of the international schools use it, but certainly when we were advising the Protection of Freedoms Bill, we had some work done in the European Parliament to see what the reaction was of different states in Europe to it. And an awful lot of the majority of the people that were representing Parliament in the EU from different states were horrified that we were using this sort of technology for mundane activities in schools. Because I think as well, giving up one's biometrics is a disproportionate amount of information to give, I think, in order to get food, library books, knowledge, and access to areas. And I think it can send a subtle message to a child that it's okay to do that. And actually it's not, because we don't do that in adult society.
And yet we are moving towards that, or so we're told, that we can expect a day when, we won't need passwords for our internet accounts, for example, that things will become biometric. So it is perhaps inevitable that that's the way things are going to go. And from from the point of view of useful technology, it can be accepted, perhaps that could be useful technology. But what about the idea of having so much information about individuals stored and what that information can be used for?
I think I think biometrics are a great technology. I just think it's a tool. It's a tool like anything else, like a hammer. You can use it to hammer in a nail, or you can use it to hurt somebody with. Yeah. And I think if we are going to go down the biometrics route, which I think we probably will as a society, because we've got the Internet of Things just around the corner, and I think for that technology to become viable, you need to verify and identify users on the system. Otherwise, it becomes corrupt and it's open to malpractice. I know banks are looking at biometrics to verify who people are. Certainly, I think Barclays are using infrared palm scanners for some of their high-end accounts, and some French banks are using voice recognition over the telephone. And I think in that sort of setting, it's okay. But I think as a society, the debate should be had as to what we should know exactly what's stored about us on these systems. And bearing in mind as well, if biometric data gets compromised, your biometric data gets compromised, and this is one of the big things that was concerning some of the big tech companies in the States when schools were using this sort of 10, 15 years ago, is that data needs to be secure for a lifetime, because if it gets compromised and it goes elsewhere, and you might find as a child that suddenly 20 years down the line you might not get a mortgage or any life insurance or something like that. The industry has tended to have thrown this technology at different applications without sort of thinking what's the situation going to be 10, 20 years down the line. They'd absolutely need to be robust, and this is what we need to, as individuals, we need to know who's got our data and what data they've got about us. Because, of course, with children in schools, especially if they're using biometric data for canteen use, it can start to build up a profile of the children's eating habits. And what with the schools measuring height and weight and educational performance and what time they get to school, there's actually a very detailed profile of an individual child there that could stay with them for the rest of their life. Where does it go when they're 18? Does the government get it? We don't know. It's that sort of data that's hiding behind the biometrics that I think we need to have the debate about.
And I mean, in even bigger picture, maybe not, so worrying just on an individual level, but if we look at the medical data that NHS England are still trying to privatise, essentially, we know that there are swathes and swathes of data purporting to people's medical records, which essentially can be sold at a huge profit, I would imagine, to companies who can benefit from that in terms of structuring their marketing around it. Now, surely this would be a similar kind of thing. If we think of millions and millions of people's biometric records, that for a company potentially could be of immense value, could it not?
It could. I mean, I think the biometric in itself is fairly... Was it worthless? It's the data that's attached to it that is really, really valuable, and it's verifying that data. And you know that if you've got a biometric and data against it, because it's verifiable by the biometric, it's probably going to be more accurate data than it is on a database that doesn't have biometrics. I know that a lot of information that schools have about children goes to the government, and the government have what's called the National Pupil Database. They've been running this for over a decade, and it is one of the richest data sets of children anywhere in the world. And about 18 months ago, the government opened that up to private companies and research universities so they could start to look at the data. The data is anonymised, but only very barely. You could sort of pick out if you wanted to, or certainly try and identify individual children from it. But these massive data sets are earning the government money, and we're not seeing any benefit from that particularly. But again, it's knowing where the information about you is going and who is looking at it that is really important, I think. And again, that's especially with biometrics and especially with this police database. I'm not certain whether any other agencies have got access to the police database. The police also run something called the Police National Computer, and other agencies can look at that. Say, for example, the DVLA, which is the driving licence agency, and the tax, HMR tax. they can access the police national computer. Again, we're not certain who can access the police national database. I think I'm under the impression it's just the police forces, but I don't know. That may have changed to other agencies. Say, for example, social securities, if there was a missing child or a parent, would they have access to the facial recognition on the database? We don't know, and this is something that hopefully we'll get more clarification on when my freedom of information request comes back.
Well, we'll follow this. We're out of time now, but we'll follow this, I hope, with your help, Pippa, in the future. Let me refer people to your blogs. You've got pippaking.blogspot.co.uk and also stateofsurveillance.blogspot.co.uk. I hope to speak to you again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.